अंसारी साहब आपने काफ़ी पर्शियन सोर्सेस पर काम किया, ख़ास तौर से एस्ट्रोनॉमी और 18th सेंचुरी और 17th सेंचुरी एस्ट्रोनॉमी के बारे में. तो while doing that, how did you, what sort of problems you confronted? You have also written about it, Jessing's observatories in India in the 18th century, and Professor S.R. Sharma has written actually even more on Jessing particularly. My question is, and I have raised it with some other people as well, because Jessing was exposed to the West. There were lots of Europeans visiting India in those times. Why Jessing stick to the Masonic observatory and did not really use the modern telescopic astronomy which was already getting popular in Europe? And he was in touch with that. He was familiar with it. What were the reasons?
You see, this is very strange that he was in 18th century, no?
1740s.
1740, 18th century. In 18th century, a person like Jessing, who was a Maharaja and a scholar of Sanskrit, became aware that the Sanskrit sources are not sufficient so far as the development of astronomy or mathematics are concerned. Probably. Otherwise, what was the need of translating the Arabic sources? So he knew, or somebody tried to convince him. We don't know who convinced him. But there were a number of astronomers, scholars of Persian and Arabic in Delhi, and some of them were also in Jaipur or Rajasthan. He thought that this Sanskrit or ancient Indian astronomy and mathematics should be overhauled. Now see, the same thing, that a higher echelon, like a Maharaja, is thinking about it. He is himself a scholar, and he understood honestly that this, whatever we have in ancient India, is not sufficient. At that point of time, when he got that translated, he was not probably in very much contact with the Jesuits. He came to contact with Jesuits when he started coming to Delhi more often, and in Delhi he met them, and then afterwards he invited them also. So in those days, in medieval period, there was the transmission of sources, astronomical sources as well as mathematical sources, from the Central Asia, Iran, into India. Normally, Central Asia and Iran should have Persian sources, but Arabic was the language of science in those days, so people used to write them. So he found that the Ptolemaic astronomy, Al-Majest, which is known as, this is also an Arabic word from Al-Majesti, but this is now in English also used. Al-Majest, as well as other sources. They were done, or they were studied further, they were promoted further, or probably modernized by Nasiruddin Tusi, who was the director of Maragha Observatory. He criticized Al-Majest and the mathematical method which Ptolemy used, and introduced some parameters which were not supposed to be there, and there was no theoretical basis for those parameters. So he wrote recension. So there are recensions or astronomy of Ptolemaic astronomy, and there is also recension on mathematics, for example, Euclid. He used to call them tahrir. Tahrir we understand today as writing, but tahrir was a review or recension Tahrir al-Majesti, Tahrir al-Euclid. Uh, so those two Arabic sources were translated. This is very interesting. Not Persian sources were translated. Probably there were already Persian sources or recensions of those in Persian sources also, which were used in madrasas afterwards. So he got it translated. He built a school, and the Sanskrit people. What was the name of his teacher who translated? Jagannath. So Jagannath translated it. Probably Jagannath didn't translate as Sharma says. Other who knew Arabic and a person who knew local language, they translated into local language what you are saying about Hindi, which you said before, about Mullah Mahmud Jaunpuri. From Arabic to the local language, from local language into Sanskrit, and Jagannath will edit it, will write a good Sanskrit, excellent Sanskrit. So in that,
Zijya Muhammad Shahi.
no, Zijya Muhammad Shahi is different. We are talking about only the translation of Tusi's book on astronomy and Euclid. So they were translated into Sanskrit. And then he built a school, and he said, Ulugh Beg table and other practical astronomy, you should also do it. Now, Ulugh Beg had also an observatory, and there was this famous sextant which Ulugh Beg built. And in those days, in Maragha also and Ulugh Beg, only the masonry instruments were there, and the telescope was not known. So he started making this. This is very interesting to know that in astronomy, if you have done some research and you have seen something special in the sky, then somebody else at some other place should also see that. And therefore he said, no, one observatory is not enough. There should be 4 or 5 observatories. So people will do the observations of the same phenomena at various places. So this is something quite modern. Anyway, that was done. No repercussion of these translations took place. They were archived in the library, and probably might have, some people have done that work. But for example, on the book of Jagannath, nobody wrote any commentary. And similarly, other translation, Euclid element, nobody wrote any commentary. So it means flat, nothing. People were not interested. Meanwhile, by chance, he came to know about the Jesuits. And Jesuits told him that astronomy has developed a lot, and you are building these. And when these observatories were there were always people there to do observations. And there are observations. There are lots of tables in Sanskrit using such observations from this type of observatories, which naked eye astronomy, which Jessing did. Then he was shown a telescope, and there is I think you brought that particular page from the diary in which it is written that this telescope was presented to no, not to Jessing, from Jessing to Muhammad Shah. Now, whatever they found, that was almost the same thing which Galileo has seen through the through the telescope. That means the satellite or moons of various planets and so on and so forth. It is written in Persian in one of the chapters, and I found in a few manuscripts that on the margin there was also some description, diagrams, for example, of Saturn and the ring sort of Saturn and Jupiter with bands and so on and so forth. And I have written an article also on that. But then he writes there also that this question I studied quite a bit, and I have written that they are all right. I can see sunspot, and I can see these planets in Jupiter and so on and so forth. But a normal person doesn't have at his disposal the telescope. So he will not be able to do any experiment. He has to use naked eye. This he writes, but he doesn't give a very important reason for it. The telescopes were only for looking, not for measuring. For the measurement, there should be a crossfire. Just like today, when you photograph, then there is a square which you see. Similarly, a crossfire, and then there is a vernier which has to be there somewhere, with which you can measure to decimal points the reading of a particular situation or location of a planet or of a star. These were not available in those telescopes. The telescopes were meant only for looking through, so you can enjoy the object and that's all. So this happened in European observatory also, and there are articles on it, and I have given in my article, which was published in Indian Journal of History of Science in 1985, Astronomy in India, Modern Astronomy in India, that such devices were not available, and therefore Jaisingh thought that this is just useless. It cannot give a good reading, and my instruments, which are so big, can give a better reading. So this is one of the reasons. There is probably one or two sources which are available in Sanskrit in which some modern astronomy of the telescopic astronomy is given. But there are many in India of modern astronomy afterwards. The people who came into contact with the engineers, British engineers and so on, and they told them what a telescope today is, and therefore they wrote. I wrote on modern astronomy in Indo-Persian sources. Abu Talib Landani, Mir Muhammad, they went there, they saw there. At that point of time, the telescopes were better, and there were also in Europe people who never used telescope in the beginning.
Mirza Abu Talib, when he comes back in 1803, and he writes his memoirs, he makes this comment that whatever he saw in London, in Paris,
yes, and it was translated into Persian.
But in India, we are actually quite far behind in our understanding of astronomical studies.
Because in the Gurukul Kangri and madrasas, these manuscripts are still there. You can go and you can read those manuscripts, but they were understood, or they were bought or purchased, and they were kept preserved there, but they were not used. Modern astronomy was not used at all. And there were no telescopes available, but the telescopes were available for the son of Shah Jahan, and he used to play with it. So the telescopes were probably available. But afterwards, when the observatories in Presidency College came and the other colleges came, St. Xavier College, then...
You named Shah Jahan. Like Mullah Mahmud Jaunpuri, who wrote this beautiful text we keep talking about, Shams-e-Bazaga. He was commissioned by Shah Jahan to go to Samarkand and to study the observatory over there, and come back and set up an observatory in India.
So what happened? You are talking about the India, then nobody talks about history of science. What happened to Shah Jahan, who was interested, who brought a very important person in his scholar, but the ministers and the clique of the ministries didn't let them. So he went back.
All the money which was earmarked for observatory, etc., was probably used for Taj Mahal.
Was for use for Taj Mahal or not is immaterial. But it was used by probably the ministers for any other work, whatever.
It was same period, or exactly the same period.
Possibly. They must have said, what is the use of this? Taj Mahal is more important.
Observatory, science, astronomy, and these monuments. No? So what are the priorities? Like for example, if you go back to even further, and you see in Akbar's court, there were Jesuits, there were all these embassies which used to come to the Mughal court, and started coming to the Mughal court. One of them brought a clock, and that clock was presented to Akbar. Now, when it was seen by him, it was seen as some sort of a curio, a curiosity. Now, clock for us was not so important. He asked his workshop people to actually replicate it, which they did.
Acha?
Yeah.
Acha.
But it was not mass produced. So clock actually was not available to generally to people. It was not seen as something very useful. Why? Because Europe was going through industrial revolution, was going through a transmission where timekeeping was important.
And here not.
And India was not, still far behind those terms.
Far behind.
So there were so many reasons why technologically also we could not adopt things which were available to us. And we just saw them as curious.
But in any case, during the medieval period, people were interested at least in predicting the eclipses of moon, and whether it was astrological reason or not. But and in the medieval period in Zijis, there are always a catalogue of stars. Probably because of the fact that they were based on Ulugh Beg, Zij Ulugh Beg. Zij is astronomical tables and mathematical tables. That is one of the reasons. But in no Sanskrit, up till now, so far as my knowledge is concerned, in no Sanskrit text, any catalogue of stars are available. So it depends, what are you interested? In India, people were interested in planets. For them, they were very important, but not the stars. And in the Islamic astronomy, planets, all right, but at the same time, the stars also. There is a very famous man whose name is Abdur Rahman Sufi. He wrote a book in Arabic about all the constellations which are available there in the sky, and the names of each star of that particular constellation. For example, this pole star and Great Bear and Small Bear. So in the Islamic culture, not only the planets but the stars were also important.
Concern here is related to what we have been talking about. Like for example, we have not been able to create a community of scholars who can access manuscripts, analyze manuscripts, read manuscripts, and write about what the manuscript says, whether it is Sanskrit, Persian, or Arabic. Now, similarly, if you just take an example, there are many scholars like him, like Rochdi Rashid in France, who is an Egyptian who settled in France, who has written extensively. Now, this man has been visiting India, and I have been part of so many of his visits to India, to different libraries. And once he went to Aligarh, and I had a lot of difficulty in arranging the facilities of photocopying, etc., whatever. He wanted some manuscript. Similarly, Raza Library, I got some manuscripts photocopied for him from Raza Library. I can't read Arabic, it was on Euclidean geometry, etc., which he used in his books which came out later on. Point is, people like him, and this is just an example, there are so many others like him, who can access these manuscripts which are our repositories in our country. They have to travel all the way from France, England, or US. We live here in India. these libraries are with us, these resources are with us, we are familiar with them, but still we don't have capabilities to understand, to read, to analyze, write about those manuscripts. They are all languishing in our libraries.
With Rushdie Rashid, it is so that he came as an Egyptian to France and then started working. He knows Arabic, or very good Arabic, and his mother tongue, beside mother tongue, he also knows very good Arabic, excellent Arabic. And he knew mathematics also. In the beginning, he had lot of difficulties in bringing French people to learn Arabic and to do some mathematics. The whole group of Rushdie Rashid became after when CNRS supported it. So this is the point. If there is one person, and he produced lot of material himself for propaganda, publicity. He could say, this is in Arabic, this is in Arabic, this is in Arabic. He was doing what we have done on our own basis. We have also done it. But we were not supported. And CNRS could support it. The French people could understand that this man is very important and we should support him. And once he was given funds, he asked people, young people, बुढ़े लोग जो हैं वो तो आएंगे नहीं अरबिक पढ़ने के लिए. So he offered scholarships, brought young people, and there were young people learned mathematics, young people learned astronomy, and they learned also Arabic, and then they started working. Now that CNRS group, his own institute is very famous, but this is done by only one person. With the support of the Research Council, CNRS is Council of Research, Scientific Research. Only when CNRS helped him, he could build enormous.
I have watched it very closely. I've been part of it for some time. I've seen how these people work. And the point is, we could not replicate something like this in India. That is our problem. That's what I'm trying to emphasize again and again.
You have not been able to replicate, and sooner or later you will not be able to replicate even people who could speak or read Arabic or Sanskrit, because Sanskrit people are not now learning mathematics and so on and so forth. They are interested in probably which subject, disciplines, I don't know.
That is why.
But so far as our Arabic and Persian is concerned, we have in Aligarh University a Department of Islamic Studies. We have in Aligarh University also a faculty of theology, in which there is a department of Sunni theology and then Shia theology, just like the Jesuit, Catholic and Protestant in Europe. Now, what I was saying? Islamic studies does not mean theology. Islamic studies does not mean that you talk about Quran Sharif or Hadith, the traditions, and what the great Imams have written. Imam means the leader. Islamic study means Islam as a culture, and cultural aspect, social aspect, philosophical aspect, even scientific aspect, but not theology, not Islam as a religion. And today Islamic science does not mean that. When I write anything about Islamic science, I write in the footnote. It does not mean it has to do with Islam as a religion, but it has to do with Islam as a culture.
See, Islamic studies in Islam, what is the madrasa curriculum? Curriculum of a seminary or a department of theology, etc. in Delhi, in Aligarh University or anywhere else. Most of this curriculum was actually formulated at a time in the history of Islam when the scientific revolution, the science in Islam of the 9th, 10th, 11th century, that particular period of philosophy, of the period of the Baitul Hikmah, etc. In Baghdad, science itself has become suspect. Madrasa did not come up in Islam during that period. Madrasa comes up in 12th century. George Saliba.
No, I'm sorry. This is not true. In India, it is the case, but in other Arabic countries, after Al-Biruni came out of that madrasa. Ibn al-Hasam came out of this madrasa. Ulugh Beg came out of the same madrasa. So in those days, madrasas used to teach not only religious sciences but also other subjects like history and especially sciences, because in those days the Greek sciences were translated.
You go and read History of Observatory in Islam by Aydin Saili. The appendix of that, which is about more than 30 pages, just talks about this. Why science was not taught in madrasas? Why this the awhile sciences?
If this is true that science was not taught, then how these people knew science? How Ibn al-Hasam knew optics?
Ibn al-Hasam is you are talking of these 5, 6, 10 people. This is not the whole representation of Islamic world. This continues in Islam even after the downfall of rationality, of rationalism, of free thinking, critical thinking, ijtihad in Islam. Even then you will find scholars in 15th century, 16th century. That's an exception. General situation in Islam was very different.
But Irfan, during the period when Al-Mamun was trying to get
that is the best period. Al-Mamun
yes, so
that is the only period.
So that is the period in which Greek sciences were translated into Arabic, and their scientists were being produced, and they also did some experiments.
All these names you are taking are from that period. I'm not talking of that period.
Of which period you are talking?
Talking of the later period, when institutionalization of a madrasa takes place as an educational institution.
So madrasa was not there
it was not institutionalized as an educational institution. These were all private schools where people were taught privately. Read George Saliba, he's given the whole history. Where madrasa comes up as an institution.
When was Nizamiya, the Nizamiya madrasa in Basra or Iraq? I think the madrasas were there. And even in India, if you see the syllabus, I can tell you that the mathematics was taught, and it was obsolete mathematics because it was only in Arabic. So Arabic mathematics which was transmitted, so it was obsolete. I'm forgetting the name, I will remember. Al-Amli's book were taught. Astronomy books were taught. Even in India, and there also, lots of very important books were taught. This happened in India especially, that all these books which were taught on mathematics were given up. They were deleted from the syllabus, and they said there is no need of science. What for science? Our madrasa is for religious only. But this never happened in Iran, and therefore in Iranian madrasas became modernized, and modernized then modern universities. It happened like that. Why it happened in Iran and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan? There the madrasas were the basis, but at that time they have some knowledge of science. It was not major fields, but at least minor fields. And then those minor fields, people were there who were studying it, and then when they went from one place to another, they promoted it. This is not true that madrasas, when they were institutionalized, then the science was not there. Because the people who were at the helm of affairs, that means the government, they were not interested in religion so much. Otherwise, you say it was a theocratic state. The the king or the क्या कहते हैं Khalifa, Caliph didn't ask them not to do any science. This is not the case. In madrasas, whatever science was there in the Greek and therefore in other for not only in the Greek but from other languages also, from Persian and pre-modern Persian, they were there, but they didn't develop further. In the history of science, world history of science, and probably in other fields also, there is always like this. There are centers. Then these centers shift from one place to another, another center, whatever be the name. For example, Germany, there was a center of physics and mathematics. Then it shifted to France, and now the Europe is not so much developed as the America, and similarly the Iran. From the Iran, the India became a center at that time. At least the Mughal patronized all those scholars who fled from there because of one reason or the other, because of religious persecution. Therefore they came here, and therefore the center of science or center of any discipline came to India. So the centers change, and now there are not only one center which shifted from one place to another. Now there are lots of centers, the Chinese and the Japanese and whatnot. No, I would say somehow or other the madrasa people themselves are responsible for this, that they deleted science from their own.
For this wonderful conversation. It was a nice opportunity to get back to you after so long and get back to you semi-formally. I'm not saying totally formally. And good to get back to old questions which have remained unresolved all these years, and we have not been able to solve them even now. And we didn't really sit together to solve any question. We just wanted to get together,
discuss
and have
details,
a conversation about you and your own work and the work which reflects upon the evolution, the growth of history of science discipline in India, or the lack of it, whatever it is. And thank you very much.